If you follow the same people as I do on YouTube, it's like everybody's moving to DaVinci Resolve. I'm not, I'm sticking with Premiere Pro. I've been using it for so long, I've picked up lots of tips which make me a better and quicker editor, so I thought, why not share a few? Hi, I'm Simon, welcome back to the channel where we talk about photo, video and all the gear you need to create it. Let's start off with some timeline tips. Now obviously you can duplicate anything on your timeline by clicking it, Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V. There's a better way. Hold down the Option key on your Mac or Alt on a PC and drag it to where you want it to be copied to and then let go. Just make sure you let go of the mouse before you let go of the key, otherwise you'll just move it. I use this a lot for copying titles, and if you look back to my previous video about the Insta360 Flow gimbal, I used this method to drag and drop the titles along the timeline to the various points I needed them, and then just went into each one and changed the wording. When I want to get something onto the timeline quickly, I do this. I double click my clip and get it up into the source monitor. Once it's in there, I find the point where I want the clip to begin and tap I to set an in point. I then scrub to roughly where I want it to end and tap O for an out point. At that point, I drag it down onto the timeline, but there are a few more things you can do there. If you click on this icon and drag it down, it'll just bring the video part of it, and if you click on the one which looks a little bit like a waveform, that will just bring down the audio. If you hold Command as you're dragging it, it'll insert the clip into the timeline. And if you hold down the Option key as you do that, it will replace the clip that you drop it onto. Now, if you're like me and you film everything in 4K, but you still upload to YouTube in 1080p, this is one for you. If you drag a 4K clip onto the timeline, it'll always appear too big, it'll be zoomed in because it's twice the size of the timeline. And then you need to go into the Effects control panel, click on Scale and type in 50. And if you're doing that for multiple clips, it can take a while. Of course, you could just copy and paste those attributes to the rest of the timeline, but there's a better way of doing it. You go into the Premiere Pro settings and choose Media, and then in the default media scaling drop-down, choose Set to Frame Size. This way, when you drag in your 4K clip, it'll automatically size it to fit the frame. One less job to do manually. If you're a person who likes to use lots of markers, this one's for you. Now by default, if you drop markers here on the timeline, every time you ripple delete a clip, all the following clips move, but the markers stay in the same place, making them basically useless. There's a way to fix that. If you go up into the clip menu and tick Ripple Sequence Markers, the next time you ripple delete a clip from the timeline, the markers will move as well as the following clips. One less frustration. Okay, tip number 5 is one I use every time I make a video. I grab the clip I want onto the timeline and then use the playhead to find the exact point I want it to start. And then tap Q, and that will delete everything before the playhead. I then move along to the out point that I want, get it just right, hit W, and it'll delete everything after that. If you only take away one tip from this video, take this one. It makes everything so much faster. So you've been building your sequence in the timeline, dragging and dropping, deleting things, moving things about. You've got everything in the order you want. There are just lots of gaps in there. Now obviously you can highlight things, drag them around, and they will snap in place. But again, Premiere's got your back on this, and there's a better way. Just go up to the sequence menu, drop down, and click Close Gap. That's all there is to it. Done. Boom. No gaps. Done. You've been working on an edit for hours. You scrub back to the beginning to do a final playthrough, and then there's a bit of audio missing. You can't just Ctrl+Z because that happened hours ago. What do? It's not as hard as you think to get it back. Highlight the clip with the missing audio and tap F. That will load it in the source monitor. It'll also have the in and out point set correctly. So you can use the audio only icon we mentioned earlier, drag it back to the timeline, your audio's back. Okay, let's move away from the timeline for a bit and go up into the Effects control panel. Anytime you add an effect to a clip or a graphic, you can add keyframes to control how it affects it. So for instance, if you wanted to move the clip from left to right slowly to make a false pan, you can. That's what I did here. This was originally filmed in landscape, but now it's on a portrait timeline. Thanks, Instagram. Now by default, the effect will just stop and start abruptly, but you can make that look a little bit more professional by using easing in and easing out. This will make your effect kind of fade in and fade out. It smooths it. It begins slowly, speeds up, and then slows down at the end. Now to turn it on, you click on that keyframe and you go down to Temporal Interpolation and then choose Ease In. Easing into the animation, and then at the other end on that keyframe you go to the same place but you choose Ease Out because you're easing out of the animation. And there's a little side tip for that. When you're up in that effects control panel dragging this playhead around, if you hold the shift key it'll snap between keyframes. The effects control panel is pretty cramped up there, and sometimes it can be hard to highlight the actual keyframes you want to get to, especially if they're at the ends of the clip. And in fact, it's impossible if you have them at the ends of the clip and then you shrink that clip on the timeline, you just can't get to them. Unless you do this. Go up to where it says Effects Control, You click on the menu, it drops down, you're looking for the option at the very bottom called Pin to Clip. It's on by default, you want it off. And then once you've turned it off, you can use the bar at the bottom here to shrink the view, to zoom out, so you can see all the keyframes you need to. Okay, here's another one I use every time I make a video. You can hear in the background now, but I always add a bed of music. And I get all my music from Epidemic Sound, by the way. There's a link in the description. You get a 1-month free trial if you want to have a little poke about and see what they've got. But in most of my videos, there'll be a point where I stop talking, be that for titles, a graphic, maybe even some B-roll. And at that point, you want your background music to step up and fill that gap. Now, yeah, one way is to use the pen tool, put points on the timeline of that music clip, and then you can drag it up in the points you want. But if you've got a lot of gaps or a very long project, that's a lot of work. It's going to take a while. It's not the most fun job in the world. But again, Premiere has your back. For this, you need to make sure the Essential Sound panel is open. That's on the right side here. Highlight the track with the speaking on and mark that as dialogue. And then highlight the track with your music on and tag that as, well, music. Once it is tagged as music, you get this section here called ducking. Now highlight the first icon, which is dialogue, and then I adjust the duck amount to about -28, 29. Click Generate Keyframes, wait for a few seconds, and you're done. If you look at your audio clip now, you'll see it moves up and down at the points when you're not speaking. All done for you. And if you make any changes to your timeline after this, you can just go back in here and re-click Generate Keyframes. The longer you've been working on a project, the higher the chance that your project bin is a mess. But again, Premiere's got you on this one. There's a couple of things you might want to check out. If you go into the Edit menu, an option for Consolidate Duplicates, and there's another one called Remove Unused, which will get rid of any clips which aren't actually in your final timeline. Now obviously, don't go using this until you finish the project. And while we're talking about tidying up the project bin, if you're in list view, there's a lot of information in here that's not really useful. So you can go in and tidy that up. You can click this top bar here and choose Metadata Display, and then go down the list and uncheck anything that's not very useful to you. And while you're in there, you can add stuff that might be useful. One piece of metadata you can add is a Boolean, which is basically a checkbox, is either on or off, and you can give this a name. This could be something like used in this project or anything else you wanted. And then I also like to add a text field, and I call this comment. So you can have a useful bit of descriptive text against every clip in your project bin. Really useful if you want to give a clip a name without actually renaming the file. So there we go, there's 13 Premiere Pro tips which will make you a more efficient and quicker editor. Let me know down in the comments if you found any of those tips particularly useful, and if you've got a tip of your own you think we should all be doing, pop it down there too. And while you're down there, there's a like and a subscribe button, so if you click either of those, I'll be really pleased. But that's it from me for this one. I'll see you next time. Bye.